Every person has a moment when the world tells them they don't belong, a moment when voices louder than their own declare them a burden, someone to be managed, contained, forgotten. This is the story of a woman who refused that verdict, not with anger, not with defiance, but with something far more powerful, the quiet determination of a mother who knew that her daughters deserved better. Visual: close-ups of weathered hands, washing clothes in a basin, braiding hair, kneading dough, holding a pen to sign documents. She was born into circumstances that were never meant to be kind. From the beginning, her life was measured in limitations, limited opportunities, limited resources, limited respect. Her family saw her potential, but was constrained by poverty. Her community saw her gender and immediately knew her place. And then life added insult to injury, hardship after hardship, each one another reason for others to shake their heads and say, "She'll never make it." Visual: a modest room. A woman sits alone, documents spread before her. The room is dimly lit. She's reading by candlelight. But here's what they didn't understand about her. She had daughters, 2 of them, and in her heart, something combusted the moment she held them, something unstoppable. It wasn't just maternal love, though it was that. It was a refusal, a complete and absolute refusal to let the world's judgment become their inheritance. Visual: montage of moments. A young girl watching her daughters play, staying up late to work, studying in the evenings, taking care of others. I remember nights when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. The landlord had just raised the rent. Again. My employer had cut my hours. Again. And I sat there thinking, this is what a burden looks like. This is what happens to people like me. But then I'd hear my daughters laughing in the other room, and something would shift inside me. Not hope exactly. Hope felt like a luxury, but a kind of clarity. They needed me to be more than what the world said I was. So I became more. Visual: a woman walking into an office building. She's nervous, but determined. Close up on her face, fear and resolve intermingled. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. She walked into a community center where adult education programs were offered. She had no formal qualification. She had no connections. What she had was less than the average person would ask for, and more than most people in her situation could manage. She had a decision: accept what the world had decided for her, or fight for something different. I signed up for the literacy program. I know that sounds simple now, but I remember my hands shaking as I wrote my name on that form. I couldn't even write it well. But the instructor, she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. She said, "You're exactly where you need to be." Not where I should be, not where I might be someday, but exactly where I needed to be in that moment. I cried for the first time in months. Visual: montage of dedication, late night studying, working multiple jobs, taking care of daughters, attending classes, persisting through setbacks. The next year was brutal. She worked days, sometimes 2 jobs. She attended classes in the evenings. She came home to her daughters and made sure they knew they were her priority. That education mattered. That life could be different. She sacrificed in ways that were almost invisible. Meals became simpler. Clothes were worn longer. Luxuries vanished. But something else appeared in their place: possibility. People would see me and say things. "You're never going to succeed at this. Why are you wasting your time? You have 2 daughters to support. You should focus on that, not your own dreams." And each comment would hit me like a stone. But I realized something important. Their doubt wasn't about me. It was about them. They didn't believe change was possible because they'd never seen it. They'd been told the same things I was being told, and they'd believed it. I decided I wouldn't. Visual: a certificate being awarded. A woman walking out of an office with paperwork. Her daughters hugging her. She earned her certificate, then her diploma. Then she found work that paid better. Not great pay, not at first, but enough. Enough to move into a better apartment. Enough to buy books for her daughters. Enough to prove that the verdict the world had given her was wrong. The day I got that job offer, I went home and I held my daughters. They were young then, maybe 7 and 9. I said, "Do you know what this means?" They shook their heads. And I said, It means that anything is possible. It means that when people tell you that you can't, you show them that you can. It means that we're going to build a home that's ours. A home that's real. Visual. A woman and her daughters painting walls. Working in a garden. Fixing things. Laughing together. A home isn't just a structure. It's not just walls and a roof and a foundation. A home is where you learn who you are. Where you learn what you're capable of. Where you learn that obstacles aren't permanent. She built that for her daughters. Not with money at first, but with presence. With integrity. With the daily choice to be better than her circumstances. And to show her children that they could be too. We didn't have much, but we had organization. We had rituals. We had conversations at dinner about what we were learning, who we wanted to become. I made it clear to my daughters, you are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved. You are the reason I wake up every morning. You are the reason I keep going. And I will do whatever it takes to make sure you know your own power. Daughters at school, at graduation, pursuing their own paths. Years passed. The daughters got older. They went to school and then to university. They saw their mother sacrifice, and they made their own choices, to work hard, to be kind, to lift others the way they'd been lifted. Because that's what happens when you build a real home. It becomes a foundation that's so strong it can support multiple generations. I remember my oldest daughter coming home from university, and she said something that made me cry. She said, "Mom, I want to help people like you helped us. People who've been told they're not enough. I want to show them differently." That's when I knew that it had worked, that it had all meant something. It wasn't just about me escaping my circumstances anymore. It was about breaking a pattern, about creating a legacy. Visual, a woman, older now, looking at photographs, looking out a window at a home filled with light. When you look at her now, you see someone different from the woman who walked into that community center. But more than that, you see the consequences of her choices reflected in everyone around her. You see strength that was learned at her table. You see resilience that was taught through example. You see the understanding that being a burden is a matter of perspective, and perspective can be changed. I think about the people who called me a burden, and I don't feel anger anymore. I feel something closer to pity, because they were limited by their own small imaginations. They couldn't see possibility because they weren't looking for it. They judge me based on circumstances, not character. And I've learned that their judgment says everything about them and nothing about me. Visual, extended family, daughters and their children. Multiple generations in one space. A home that's full. The home she built stands today not as a monument to her struggle, but as a proof of concept. It proves that circumstances don't determine destiny. That being called a burden can become the catalyst for becoming remarkable. That a mother's love, combined with her determination, can rewrite a family's future. If I could speak to anyone reading this who's been told they're a burden, I would say this. You are not what others decide you are. You are not defined by your limitations, your past, or the judgments of people who couldn't see your potential. Your life is still being written. Your daughters, your sons, your family, they are watching to see what you do with this moment. Will you accept the verdict, or will you fight? Because fighting doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like signing up for a class, like staying up late to study, like choosing to believe in yourself when no one else does. The home you build might not have the most impressive architecture, but if you build it with intention and love and refusal to accept less than you deserve, then it will stand. And everyone who comes after you will stand stronger because of it. Visual, the woman at a community event, mentoring younger women, sharing her story, others listening intently. She doesn't think of herself as special. She thinks of herself as someone who had no choice but to succeed because the alternative, accepting a false narrative about herself, was unacceptable. But that's exactly what makes her special. That's exactly what makes her a model for what human resilience looks like when it's combined with purpose. I was called a burden, and I heard it. I believed it for a while. But then I remembered something. Burdens are things that weigh others down. My love for my daughters didn't weigh them down. It lifted them up. My determination didn't burden them. It inspired them. And the home I built doesn't burden anyone. It welcomes everyone. So no, I was never a burden. I was always exactly what my family needed. I just had to become brave enough to believe it. Visual, the home at sunset. Warm light coming from inside. Family members visible through windows, laughing, eating, living. This is a story about a woman. But more than that, it's a story about what's possible when someone decides that their circumstances are not their destiny. When they choose to build instead of break. When they choose to love instead of surrender. The home she built stands today. Not because the world made it easy for her, but because she refused to make it impossible for herself. And that, more than anything, is what stands.